Hey everybody. Everyone been getting enough sleep this weekend? Yeah, me too. Lots of green juice. So here we are, the closing plenary. You finally made it. Congratulations. I want to start by congratulating all of the conference organizers. This has been a really, really terrific event. This is my first CARE conference. It's one of the favorite conferences I've ever been to. It's been awesome. Every talk I've seen has been so high quality. I'm just really, really impressed. The food's been great. I know what a pain in the butt it is to put on big events like this. It is so stressful for like months in advance. So I just want to thank everyone involved, and especially the volunteers and staff who just made everything run so smoothly and made everyone feel so welcome. So let's give it up for those folks. I was asked to talk a bit about working on incremental change, the project in front of us, and try to give a positive message at the end to end the conference with. So, being American, at least the second part should come pretty naturally to me, and hopefully I can convince you about welfare campaigns as well. So before getting into the positivity, I want to start with a brief defense of welfare campaigns, incremental change, whatever you want to call it. And this argument was really written out quite well by my colleague Hannah, who is here, and I am plagiarizing recklessly from her throughout this talk, which is available, her writing is available on our website. You can go there. It's in a blog post. You can also find it by visiting our Facebook page and making a rude comment about cage-free. One of our staff may share it with you. So we run into arguments against our incremental work all the time, right? That being an animal rights group, being a vegan organization, whatever, that's incompatible with this kind of piecemeal progress that we're also fighting for in our campaigns. So, on the most basic level, I couldn't disagree with this one. So first of all, we still believe that promoting veganism is good. We can, and the Humane League does, promote veganism. We encourage behavior change at the same time as fighting for better standards for animals. So in the most literal terms, the two are not mutually exclusive because we have proof that groups are out there doing this. So we know it's possible. And our movement has spent decades, millions of dollars, countless hours from volunteers and activists all around the world, reaching millions of people, telling them about veganism, telling them about factory farming. And that's good. This is how we will find the other people like us. I've personally spent huge amounts of my own time doing this, traveling around, handing out booklets, giving talks in high schools, tabling at events. Probably everyone in this room can relate to what I'm saying right now. But as much as we might want it to, the world is not going to go vegan overnight. On an individual level, sure, we can try to encourage everyone to change their diets. But we have yet to see this work as the single brute force strategy for change, which means as a movement, it's on us to explore some other avenues to help animals out. And while we might be able to sometimes win individual hearts and minds with a conversation or a booklet or a video, we have no realistic possibility of making companies with millions of animals in their supply chains stop using them immediately, no matter how good our arguments are. And that means for the foreseeable future, billions of animals are going to be suffering on factory farms and being killed in slaughterhouses. That's a reality. Science shows us, the Humane League, that means Vicky tells us, that we can meaningfully reduce the suffering of these billions of animals by creating concrete changes on real farms in the real world. Ending the use of cages, giving animals more space, banning the most cruel slaughter methods, ending mutilation without anesthetic. If you were an animal on a farm, you would want any of those things to happen, right? To animals, this suffering matters. These small changes can make a very big difference to a vast number of animals. We have a very real possibility of actually doing these things. We can ban those practices. We've been able to succeed at improving the lives of farm animals. So it's not just like something we can do, it's something that we have a moral imperative to do. We must do it because we know it works. We have to seize on these opportunities for reduced suffering where we can. And the moral argument for not eating animals, in essence that killing them when we can live without doing so is wrong, that is a very strong moral argument. Working to improve animal welfare, increasing protections for animals, raising awareness, these things do not hurt that argument. I never quite understood the other position on this, that we weaken the argument for animal rights if conditions become good for animals, if farms were all nice. It seems so clear to me that as society acknowledges that animals matter and makes costlier and costlier changes to protect them, that their political position becomes stronger, not weaker. Here's a thought experiment. Let's say you want to pass the Animal Bill of Rights in your country. Do you think that it would be easier to do that today, in this world, where animals have almost no protections, and when the situation could hardly be worse, when every standard practice is a nightmare that makes most people sick to watch on video? Or would it be easier to pass that Bill of Rights in a world where there was far less meat consumption, and animals had tons of protections and laws, and politicians were talking about animal issues all the time, and every voter knew about it? If animal groups were well-funded and large and powerful, and had lobbyists, and had politicians fighting alongside us, it seems very clear to me that the second scenario is a much better place for our movement to be in. And the logical conclusion of the other perspective is that we should in fact work to decrease the protections for animals, make their suffering worse on farms, so that our argument is as strong as possible, that they're hurt in such heinous ways that society will just decide to change overnight. All social justice movements have been a journey of incremental changes. In our movement, these changes are a necessary path for the world to stop treating animals as products. Simply put by Hannah, that's one of my favorite lines, it is very clear that a world free from animal suffering starts with a world with less animal suffering. When the time comes where these tactics prove less effective in helping animals, when this corporate campaigning, let's say, strategy is less effective, we can refocus and work on other campaigns, which are more effective in reducing even more suffering and building more political power. All of us are aware that it's not enough, it's not the end game, that it's a compromise, but it's also a start to a longer road. Once companies, governments, whatever, acknowledge that animals are sentient beings, that they have needs which should be met for moral reasons because they can suffer, there's always a case for making more and more steps in that direction. That is the story of all social progress in the entire world. And recent history proves it about animals. We've seen major companies over the last decade gradually improve their policies, creating bigger and bigger changes. We've seen more and more progressive laws being passed in the wake of this. Progress has setbacks. It's slow, it's frustrating, but ultimately, people working in politics, people working in other longer-running movements, they know that every small win builds up to achieve the ultimate goal. Before animal rights, I worked a lot on political campaigns in the US. And in that world, this way of thinking about the world in incremental changes is just so ingrained in everyone who works in politics that it couldn't even be questioned. Anything other than thinking that way would be seen as a joke. You would never be able to achieve anything in politics. The only goal in politics is to achieve what is possible. It's impossible to pass a law that solves all the problems you care about. It's impossible to find a perfect political candidate that you're completely aligned with, who's going to succeed in everything you want. It's a struggle where you try to get more and more successes under your belt to make the world incrementally better. You do what you can now, and then you prepare for the next fight. In most of our regions where we're working, ending cages is just one of the many things that we're fighting for. We have past progress that we've won, and more importantly, we have fights in the future that we need to win. In the US, where I've done most of my work, for example, we fought on confinement for cows, then for pigs, then for laying hens. Currently, there's groups working on plant-based technologies, broiler campaigns, passing laws to lock in and expand the commitments and laws that exist. Every issue or campaign is an important part of the story, but it's just one part, and everyone's aware of that. Our success in each area, how effective we are at creating that real change, it will impact every other issue. And ultimately, the issues we're working on today are just the beginning. Nobody in this room is here because they're satisfied with whatever the latest victory we've achieved is, right? It just excites us on to do more. We're here because we have a vision of true victory, where we've changed the relationship between humans and non-human animals, where the world is a different place. That is, we have a vision of our retirement at some point. This long-term view, I think it has to inform our strategy in many ways. We're a very long way from our goal of ending the abuse of animals. And for that reason, we have to see this incremental progress, and especially capacity building, as the priority for the time being. This is both to gain increasing power over time, as well as, frankly, to be careful in a situation where there's a lot of uncertainty, where picking the perfect strategy is incredibly difficult. Short-term wins, welfare improvements, incremental laws, these things are good in themselves. They're worth doing in themselves because they reduce suffering. But more importantly, they're instrumental in building up a functional coalition and a grassroots and a public base of support for our issue. And while not necessarily always the fastest route to short-term victories, we must see the training and the leadership development of new activists and smaller organizations as essential to the success of our long-term goals, whether it's abolishing cages, reforming the broiler industry, banning fur farming, expanding into new areas like Africa and Asia. Events like this one, in my mind, are some of the most important things that happen in our movement, as much as any short-term campaign victory. And with this in mind, this long-term view, I believe we must set our sights on institutions and eventually legal change. Individual diet change, winning hearts and minds, this is important. It's instrumentally important. It recruits allies, it reduces demand for meat, it increases the demand for alternatives to animal products. But at the end of the day, this is a social movement, it's a political movement. And we must center it around the animals and what they need from us. They need us to build political power, the power to shape society, the power to shape laws. Individuals will be changed to join us, but that is not the end goal. So what we're working on now is a beginning. But what's next? Instead of any single solution or plan, the fundamental idea that I think we must embrace is this. We must put pragmatism before ideology. Many of the most successful groups and activists here at this conference have a long history of changing their work and their theories of change to reflect their thinking on what will do the most good for animals. What we're doing now will likely not be what we're working on in the future. We always have to keep our eyes on the bottom line. What impact will we have on the lives of animals on farms, in fur facilities? Are our actions truly reducing the abuse that's happening to these animals? And at the end of the day, it's important that we don't get caught up in our identity of what kind of group we are, what kind of activist we are. Whether you're a corporate campaigner or an investigator, a leafleter, we just need to push ourselves to be what the mission requires of us, even if it's not comfortable or glamorous or popular. That is what the animals demand of us. I'm not standing here today to share with you a complete or correct roadmap for animal rights, so I apologize if that's what you came here for. You know, it's a very trite thing to say, but really I'm asking you to think for yourself. to criticize and sharpen my strategy, the other strategies out there being presented to you, to pursue what you think will be most effective. And most of all, to be open to change, to accept that all of us are wasting some amount of our time on the wrong projects right now, and that that's okay. And that we'll be focusing on very different work in 10 years, just as we were doing totally different things 10 years in the past. There are a lot of people out there who do not share my point of view here, who are very willing to confidently answer the question of how do we win animal rights? There are a lot of activists who will tell you that it's happening soon and that they found the one simple trick to make it happen. And especially for the new people in the room, where this might be your first conference, I really want to underline something here. Charismatic leaders who claim to have solved animal rights, who have found the groundbreaking tactic or strategy that will end animal cruelty, people who offer a very convenient answer that appeals to you on a philosophical and emotional level, this should set off a red flag, because it's probably bullshit. Indeed, no single person or group is going to make this happen. Coalition work is absolutely essential for the success of our mission. A coordinated front that includes investigations and corporate work and public pressure campaigns and media and lobbying and veterinary science and capacity building and grassroots organizing and auditing and more and more and more. Success requires focus, and no one group can succeed at all of those things. And therefore, our project is to determine what each one of us, what our groups are best at, where we can do the most good in our role in the movement, and focus on that, and then team up and take on our enemies as united front together. So at the risk of inviting unfavorable comparison, I want to suggest a talk from last year's conference that's available in full on YouTube by my dear friend and colleague, Erins. He gives a very detailed argument with examples from history about the exciting progress that's been won through a strategy of incremental change. He looks to things like the gay rights movement in the US, the fight to win protections for children. He even looks at the hard-won progress of our own movement. And because he did a very excellent job, I won't try to repeat it. And instead, I actually want to leave behind the rational argument for welfare campaigns and my own pet strategy. I'll leave the historical case to Erins. And I want to focus on something else that I think actually underlies the opposition to incremental work. And that's the emotional and the moral convictions that many, and especially new activists, feel prevent them from doing this kind of work. And I will start with a confession. My name is Dave, and I was an abolitionist. And not just around animal rights, but in all ways. I was an extremist, an absolutist, a purist. It was really a total approach to life. My core beliefs were as follows: the world is bad. I have the correct politics that can fix it. I can change people with logical argument because I am correct. And expressing myself and these beliefs is the most pure form of political action. People who knew me back then knew me to be a very different person than I am now in many ways. I was more uptight, judgmental. I laughed a lot less. I was not very much fun at parties. And sure, I looked great, but at the end of the day, that's not everything, okay? And spending years in this mindset, it actually lets me sympathize with those who criticize and even hate the current work that I do. People who attack me and my friends and question our motives and say we're working for an industry that we're hurting the movement. When we all see such a clear moral crisis in front of us, something that you imagine you should just be able to resolve with our argument, that senseless killing and torture is wrong. Like, this is a very strong moral argument. The idea of asking for something as small as cage-free or meatless Mondays, it is an outrage. It's repugnant. Like, the world is on fire around us and billions of animals are being born and killed. I mean, just as I'm giving this talk, countless thousands are being murdered. Thousands more are being born into the system. And at the end of the day, it makes me admit that fundamentally that outrage, that moral argument is absolutely correct. There can be no question. And I don't relish living in circumstances that demand half measures and compromise and frustratingly slow progress. I hate it. You know, I used to do a lot more corporate outreach, and I distinctly remember a certain feeling that I would get where this young Dave inside of me would make an appearance in my mind. When I was talking to some powerful decision maker, like a wealthy executive with thousands of employees, just endless resources, and you're showing them pictures of just horrible cruelty, of animals crammed in little cages and crates, barely bigger than their bodies, with pigs lying in these coffin-sized crates for most of their lives. And you're asking them to do what, for them in the big picture, is almost nothing. Something that will cost them none of their time, a tiny bit of their money that they won't notice. It will make a huge difference for all of these living, breathing creatures that they're looking at in a picture right in front of them. And their inaction, you're making clear to them, is the one thing that is keeping this going. And just watching them sit there and wring their hands and complain about money and complain about the budgets and the timelines and the board, I would feel that outrage. I think if you don't feel that there's something wrong with you. It's obnoxious, it's horrible. But right then, in that moment, when you feel the discomfort of our circumstances, when you realize that we're just a very small group of people in a world that has gone dreadfully wrong and doesn't care, those are the times when you want or need to make yourself very clear with this executive you're talking to so that they understand that they're an asshole. That is the moment you have to remind yourself that I'm not here to manage my discomfort. I'm not here to manage my frustration or tell my version of the truth. Instead, you have to place yourself inside of the cage, right? Inside of the slaughterhouse. Look through the eyes of the individuals who will never be able to enter this boardroom and argue for better conditions, argue for reforms. What do they want? What is it that they care about? And the more I spend time imagining myself in this cage or in the slaughterhouse, the more I realize that I don't particularly care about who wins an argument, or who owns somebody on a Facebook wall, or who has fully expressed their own truth. I care about one thing, the actual conditions of my life, and the fact that I have no power to improve them. I'll never know about the animal rights movement, I'll never know about the people in this room, people like us around the world, never know what a supply chain is. What I do know is that I won't be able to turn around, can't go outside, I'll be murdered soon. The time we spend indulging our needs, making ourselves comfortable, speaking our truth. As we say in America, the time we spend keeping it real. To give up strategy in favor of passion and anger and righteousness. That is time that we're stealing from the animals. Every dollar and every word. Those are small efforts that could have brought us closer to the end of all this. But instead, they haven't. So now I have another confession. I'm still an abolitionist. And the heart of young Dave still beats in my chest. And the reason I work to move progress in tiny amounts, piece by piece, is not a rational one. It's not because of just cold logic. It's moral. The reason that we do this work, that I do it, is that I worry that doing anything else is stealing from those who are counting on us. So this is my emotional plea to you. Hold on to that passion and use it to motivate you when you need it. But mostly use your mind and exercise your patience and your discipline and be relentless and meticulous in your approach. Take risks, but be sober about what is actually possible. You have to make hard choices. This is the only roadmap I can give you. I like to call it winning animal rights, the hard way. Dotting every I and crossing every T. We need to be relentless and unstoppable, inching progress bit by bit, because we owe that to the animals. We need to do it right and build actual power and show our enemies that we will never stop. We're not just indulging our hobbies and our passions. The real process of winning animal rights, it doesn't look like somebody giving a speech or a single march or a protest or an investigation. It looks like this. It's just committed, smart people working together over years, trying out new ideas, building trust and alliances, keeping each other motivated. There's no heroes and there's no silver bullets. There's no moment when we defeat the supervillain or find a magic sword or something. It's just us and our friends doing the hard work. So in closing, I want to share some thoughts and really targeting the new activists in the room who might have only been in the movement for a few years, maybe a few months, a few days, maybe it's your first thing you've ever done is come to this conference. Here's a picture of me at my first Humane League event, where I met Erin for the first time. I'm 21 years old in this picture. And I didn't have any clue what I was doing. I never really accomplished anything. All the activists that I met were incredibly intimidating and badass and fearless, and they all seemed to know so much, and I didn't know what any of the books were that they were talking about, or who the people were, or the organizations, or the acronyms. And you know, the reality is the same thing was true of Erin just a few years before this picture. The same thing was true for all the leaders here. Dobroja and Jan, and George, and Vicky, Melanie, so on and so forth. Even Peter Singer once wore diapers and ate baby food. In the years after this picture, I've basically learned everything by making mistakes and trying things that I was scared to do and learning on the job. And that's the same answer for every other person who spoke at this conference. You know, I've been at enough events like this and hired and trained enough activists at this point to know that many of the new people in this room are probably feeling what we call imposter syndrome in the US. The idea that you're never going to catch up, that everybody else has this special quality that you're missing, that they're tough, they're a genius, or they're charismatic, or whatever it is that you think you don't have. But it's not true. You're here because you're completely qualified to solve this problem with us. And in a year or two, you won't believe how far you've come and how much you've caught up and that you found your place and what you want to do. The bad news, though, is that you're likely going to have a new set of things to compare to others and to worry about. So I'll just try to help out by making a final confession, which is that I also feel this way. All of us do. Every person who spoke at this conference. Every person who's in this room. Even the people who've done really incredible, brave things and have tons of victories under their name, published books. All of us sometimes feel like frauds or imposters, or at some point, people are going to notice that I'm actually not qualified to be up here giving this speech. We look at the work of other groups, people like me who run big, powerful organizations, and I think, I never could have come up with that idea, or that campaign is so great, I'm so impressed and jealous, frankly. Or I can't be a real leader like that person. I'm not going to be as good a manager, whatever it is. One good way to overcome these feelings when they happen is to remember that every other person is thinking the same thing. And I urge all of you, and now I'm particularly directing this at the leaders in the movement, to be more open and honest about how tough things can be. And not worry so much about projecting confidence and power to people. Sometimes the most inspiring and empowering thing that we can do as leaders is just admit that sometimes this is really fucking hard and it sucks. So it's an inescapable reality that we live in a world where other people are going to look at us and form opinions about us, and that's very scary. It's the human condition. And there's a lot of impressive people around, and it can be very intimidating. And maybe that's not the positive message I want to end on. So let's remind ourselves of some other things. We are all part of something bigger than ourselves. And we get to be friends and colleagues with these amazing people. And we get to participate in something great that's helping to protect the most innocent among us. And just by choosing to do this, by choosing to make the suffering of others the focus of your life, You're already a wonderful person. Every one of you, and to me at least. And even though I look around the room and think that I'll never be as logical as Marek, or my beard will never be as full as Benny's, I'll never speak as many languages as Dobrosha, I'll never be a pioneer in my country like Christina, I'll never be as good a writer as Hannah, it really doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that at the end of the day, I'm going to put all of that aside and get back to work. And I invite you to join me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, for this really on-point talk. Do we have any questions? Anyone? Don't be scared. Yes? Yeah, she's like summed up everything so perfectly. But maybe so. I saw some hands raised, but like no, really. Yeah. So I guess I will have a question then. Yeah. I was wondering, like, do you can name like one thing about running an organization that's so successful that was like super scary at the very beginning, but maybe like turned out not to be so awful at all later?
You know, it's hard to answer that question because I feel like, and it's not just me, I think like everyone in the leadership role at THL has been around for a long time. It's like every few months we're facing these new challenges as the organization grows, and this is the same for every group here really. And very consistently, I have this like kind of thought experiment I do to reflect on this, where I think about like a year or two ago, what were the things that caused me the most anxiety in my work or that I was most stressed about? So there are periods of time, like before every board meeting, for example, I would like create a presentation and practice it endlessly, and I would get like really sweaty and scared before the board meeting. And after doing it like over and over every quarter for a long time, it just became very comfortable and natural. And then I would look back and kind of like laugh to myself, like, man, I used to waste so much time practicing for these board meetings, and now I can do it in, you know, like half an hour of preparation or whatever. And there's like a million examples like that, but the one consistent thread is that the only way to get over the fear is just to start doing it. I mean, whether it's public speaking or doing investigations or going to corporate meetings, whatever it is that you feel like you really want to try, it's always going to be horrible the first few times. It is for everyone. It's fine.
Thank you. So maybe you've just inspired some new speakers for the next edition of the conference. Any questions still? Come on. Still have some time left. We want to finish earlier. We don't want to leave. So. No, nothing. So I guess we will finish with that. Thank you so much for that. And on behalf of Oxford Technology and the whole Anima International, I would like to thank you all for coming this year and hopefully see you next year. We're not entirely sure where the conference will be, but if there are any organizations or countries, preferably, especially from like Central and Eastern Europe, that are interested, next year, then just stay in touch and let us know. Okay, thank you.